I sat at home thinking about the last time Lauren talked about going out. Recent she had been, far away, as though she were living in another world. Until tonight I hadn't decided to face the truth. So, I sent her a message, letting her know that I was on to her, but this is over soon, enjoy tonight. It was probably Lauren, out at some upscale restaurant, sitting across from Jake, the man I figured she was dating. I could picture it clearly, light and carefree, as if she were reading from some well-rehearsed script, her laughter. Probably she seemed calm, having a blast. I knew her well enough that I could bet she wasn't calm inside. I envisioned what her phone would look like the next time it vibrated, and how she'd flinch when she sees my name. Jake would be clueless, of course. Because he'd be sitting there, smooth as ever, sipping his wine, as if nothing else in the world mattered. He was the opposite of me, a spontaneous but reckless and unpredictable fun. I could understand why someone so different from me would be attractive to her. I thought that between the two of us, our life was stable, based on trust, and apparently what I thought was love. She might have used to love me, but now we were doing it with Lauren in the middle of an affair she couldn't, or wouldn't, tell the whole story of. I'd wanted to call her out on it so many times. I knew it was time. So every time I caught her in a lie, I knew that's when I'd bring it up. I just held back hoping that it wasn't that bad. I couldn't hold back tonight. I knew the truth would come out one way or another when I sent that message. Lauren would be sitting there looking down at her phone, her face going white, reading my message. I could hear her shallow breaths, her fake smile as she surged to hide her panic behind a forced smile. He might look worried, then lean in, asking if she was okay, could he help? But she wasn't all right. I wasn't either. It was all about to fall apart, and nothing was going to happen. I could only imagine what Lauren would have felt at that moment. Jake kissed her hand, leaned in and kissed her lips, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her, sitting there. Probably his words were just blending into the background noise as my message played over and over again in her mind. I'm sure she couldn't concentrate on what he was saying. Whatever she had in mind for tonight, the chill of my warning creeping up her spine must have told her it wasn't going to happen the way she planned it. That all began about a month ago. Before, I'd never questioned Lauren, asked her where she was going, or with whom. That night, though, when she came home late, after she told me she'd been out for dinner with friends, I detected something, a faint trace of a man's cologne. I knew it was expensive, and it wasn't mine. That was all it needed to make the first flicker of doubt. I'm not someone to act on impulse. I am, always, patient, the kind who thinks things through. I didn't say a word to her right then and there. I began to pay closer attention to everything she would do. I felt the changes little by little. Lauren was absent-minded, glancing at her phone that never left her side. She'd even smile at the screen in ways that turned my gut. I didn't have to be told what was going on. It didn't require her to speak a word. It was already a confession in her behavior. Between the thrill of her secret, Lauren was so lost she couldn't even realize how sloppy she'd gotten. She was supposed to be smart, in charge. I knew exactly what she was up to. I wasn't sitting there silently because it hurt. I was waiting. Planning. It had been calculated, every affectionate gesture, every kind word. I wanted her to feel safe, wanted to believe she was going to get away with it. I wasn't going to blow up or become enraged. I'm not that kind of person. I was not. I was just waiting for the right moment. A moment when Lauren was so lost in her lies, she wouldn't realize the storm was coming. Perhaps she had startled when her phone buzzed again. I could tell my messages were working. I could picture her fingers trembling as she glanced at the screen, only to see my next words staring back at her. Do you really think no one will find out about this? Fear had finally set in. I could imagine her stomach churning. I knew she wouldn't break, didn't want to cry for the sake of Jake. I imagined Lauren gripping her phone, like a vice was closing around it. She couldn't just stand up and walk out, not here, Not in the middle of a fancy restaurant where she knew people would be watching her every move. She must also have felt suffocated, with a shadow coming up on her and pressing in. She'd be stuck, with nowhere to go. Now Jake would be talking and his voice would be nothing but a dull hum to her. I noticed her using her eyes to scan the room, looking at all the tables as people were loud and chatting, living away in their own worlds. It would all be so normal, but I knew she knew something was terribly wrong. And then, she would see them, his wife, her sister, her uncle and cousin. Those stern, unblinking eyes watching her every move, just a few tables away. We would have the truth written all over their faces. They knew. They knew everything. Then she would know that silence was louder than words could be. Lauren's hands would start to shake. She had always been traditional and rigid, a family that didn't forgive betrayal. Their judgment was about to threaten to crush her world beneath, and I could see each step they took towards the door as a knife cutting deeper. She must have known in that moment. All I could see were her thoughts spiraling, caught up in me and how she has a hand in all of this. I knew Lauren had told her family that I figured it all out. She was unraveling her own secret life and there was nothing she could do. This was no accident. I had met her family privately a few days earlier. I was calm, methodical, showing them everything I'd gathered, all of her betrayal. Photos, messages, etc. I could see the shock in their faces, they didn't want to believe it. But I was steady, unwavering. I did not ask them to make a scene or throw her out. I used them so that Lauren would tear down her own life in front of them. And, they agreed to my plan, so we were here, watching it all come to fruition like I had planned. Everything I'd planned fell into place, and Lauren's family had disappointment plain on their faces. They had come to see her lies be undone and to see my revenge realized right before them. It was probably a darker, heavier room now, with everyone around able to feel the guilt she wore like a scarlet letter. I could see Jake noticing her distress. He'd become worried as his brows creased in concern, his voice tinged with worry as he asked, "What's going on? You're shaking. Are you okay?" She might smile, but it'll be a small smile. There was no way she could explain the storm swirling inside her, tough looks from family, cryptic messages from me, everything surrounding her, threatening to break her apart. She'd probably steady herself, but the panic would be rising too fast. That's when Jake would say something ridiculous, like "I love you, Lauren. If something's wrong, we'll fix that together. I won't leave you. We just need to get out of here, to somewhere quiet, you and I." He was trying to be her savior, and I almost felt sorry for him. He was as trapped in this mess as she was. Then, just when she was about to agree, ready to run away with him, her phone would buzz. If I looked down, I knew that everything would change out of the corner of Jake's eye. He would lose his color and smile and fear would replace his eyes, fear Lauren had likely never seen before. As soon as Jake finished his dinner, he would stand up, count out cash to pay the bill and dash out. She would have been clear as day, Lauren's bewildered expression as she was trying to grab hold of him. "Jake, wait! What's happening? Did something go wrong?" He wouldn't answer, but he wouldn't look at her. As she implored him to tell her what it was, he'd be focused on getting out and pulling his arm away. He would be firm, cold. "No. The problems I have are serious, and they'll take a long time." His words would punch her in the gut and leave her standing there, alone. Then, as he turned to go, he might glance back briefly, long enough to catch a glimpse of his phone screen, a quick image showing what had shaken him so badly. But it wouldn't matter. The damage was done. Her own betrayal would stand ruined and Lauren would be left standing. I thought about how Lauren broke in Lauren desperate pleas as Jake turned his back to walk away. But he wouldn't stop. He was looked over his shoulder at one last time, eyes unreachable, face stern and distant, blood running as cold as hers. Then he would say something, like "Goodbye, Lauren," to say goodbye to his life as he had to say goodbye to her. She must have just stood there, trying to put it together. She probably knew him and that he was free, had no ties, and she probably thought she could handle him. But as reality set in, she'd begin to realize the truth. Jake had his own secrets. I already knew he wasn't just anyone who was out having fun with someone. He had a wife, a family, a life. Finally, Lauren would understand that the man she knew wasn't what he said he was. I'd known all this long before Lauren ever would. I found out about Jake's two lives. His marriage was just as much business and property deal as it was personal. He wasn't the only one cheating on his wife, he was off having fantasies on the side. I'd even tipped his wife off a bit before dinner. I knew Lauren was going to end up alone. I'd made sure of it. She sat there now, all alone at that table, nobody to comfort her. She was exactly the place I wanted her, truly alone. Jake had abandoned her and both her family was gone. She probably snapped out of her thoughts right on cue when her phone probably buzzed again. She'd look down and see another message from me. Don't go home, Lauren. You don't have a home. Her heart would start beating 1,000 miles a minute, and she'd start to panic. But she might jump up, knocking over her chair, and she would desperately want to fix things somehow. But it was too late. Nothing needed fixing. Just thinking of her rushing out of the restaurant, barely able to breathe, fumbling with her keys, shaking so bad she couldn't even manage to unlock her car, helped to calm my mind. She'd begin the engine and we'd die when she headed, I'm sure, to the only place left to go, our apartment. That drive won't get her any answers, only more questions. But that was how I wanted it. Lauren's frantically driving to make sense of all this, I could see. She had clung to this hope that she could, for some reason, talk to me and explain herself and make it all go away. Still, she knew deep down there was no more explaining. It had all been in the works a long time now. I knew what she'd find when she finally made it to the apartment. The door could have opened easily, but it wouldn't feel like home. Up ahead, all warmth was gone, replaced by a cold void. Whenever she'd step into the living room her footsteps would echo, and she'd see the scene I had set up for her. Everything into a few cardboard boxes, in all her clothes, shoes, books. The life we'd shared was a handful of boxes stacked on the floor. There were 2 piles of paperwork on the shelf that I'd left. There was one, a stack of divorce papers, and the other, a torn-up lease. If she'd stop, she would catch her breath at the realization of what was happening. She had until tomorrow to get the hell out. Tears filled her eyes and her sobs started, until she dropped to her knees, clenching the divorce papers in her hands. I wanted her to carry the burden of each choice she thought I hadn't seen. I'd never given the apartment a second thought in having my name on it. That just gave me all the leverage I needed. She'd been out with Jake, thinking everything was still okay, when I had packed up her things and left them where she couldn't miss them. But the divorce papers lay there right next to the torn-up lease, and her life here was over. I didn't need to yell. I didn't have to raise angry words at her. I wanted her to sit there, and just know what she'd lost, and it was too late to fix any of it. Tears streaming down her face as she sat on the floor, I knew it was the final piece. It buzzed one last time on her phone. I'd sent her the final message, Lauren, it was your choice. She had no one else to blame. I could picture her lying on that cold floor, crying as the weight of everything came crashing down on her. I could see Lauren sitting with nothing but her stuff all around her in boxes, in the apartment. She was haunted by the reminders of the life she'd thrown away and tried to get the last bit of it. Her tears seemed endless. She'd hold her phone in her hand, her trembling finger hovering over my contact. It was always press call, and as she pressed call, each beep would feel like a knife cutting through her. But I didn't answer. I wanted her to feel that emptiness, that void. I wanted her to know I was through with her. Her memories, the plans we'd made for our life, flashed in front of her eyes as I could almost. We talked about having kids, and in just a few months we'd planned to buy a house. Then we'd had dreams, and a future we'd thought was so solid. All of it was gone now because of one reckless affair. Losing everything, she probably didn't mean it, no, just the thrill, the secret excitement. Now she was paying the price and there was no going back. I could picture her next desperate move, as she was trying to call Jake, clinging to the hope that he could maybe help her, or help make sense of it all. Then when she dialed his number, there was nothing. Not even a beep. And then, she'd try to unblock him and finally, it would occur to her that Jake had blocked her. Cutting her off completely, he'd disappeared back into the shadows where their little affair had once bloomed. Then, it would really sink in. She'd know, just like everyone else, that he too left her. He'd thrown her away like a used tissue. I could imagine the rage boiling in her, the bitter fury of life at herself, at everything. She would likely stand, throw a box across the room and another to the ground, kick it until the contents hit the floor, clothes, books, little things that reminded us of who we used to be. She'd scream, let out all the pain and anger, scream until she was sore screaming, forever bound to the life she'd chosen and the price she had to pay. Like Lauren caught in the eye of the tornado she'd created, I could see her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. If she had collapsed in the middle of the mess, she would have been utterly exhausted, physically and emotionally. She lay broken, trying to take a breath, trying to make sense of the life she'd built for herself, and she cried tears down her face. So desperate was I to think that she was trying to call her uncle. Only a couple of times did the phone ring before his heavy, stern voice came through. And there would be a thick silence between them, because she could still see his cold stare from the restaurant. She'd say, "Uncle, help me please." I knew her uncle's tone well enough to know it would be unyielding, unforgiving. "My girl, you made a big mistake. It is a shame on our family." She'd be crying, but her tears would still be falling, and I could almost hear her choking back a sob as she tried to find her words. "Please. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to be. I need you." I imagined he was going to shake his head on the other end of the line, sighing with disgust. "Your father promised, Lauren. I promised him I'd take care of you. You didn't just betray David, you betrayed us all, your father, your family. We're in a tough place, you've put us all in it." She'd stammer and sob, desperate to say the right thing, sobbing, "I didn't mean to. I never wanted this." But it wouldn't matter. But her uncle was a man of principle, and forgiveness wasn't easy given a betrayal like this. The silence would stretch on and Lauren would start to understand just how far she'd fallen from those she would have thought to have stood by her no matter what. I could make out her holding her breath, waiting for her uncle to reply. He'd let out a deep sigh after a long pause, and his voice might soften a little. "Family doesn't leave its own. I won't leave you, Lauren. This is going to be something you're going to have to make up for. The thing is, it's not going to be easy, and things won't be the same until you fix it." His words burned the shame all through her, and her heart would break all over again. But she'd be glad, at least she wasn't completely alone. She'd breathe, "Thank you, Uncle," nearly a murmur. He'd still be firm though, "Don't thank me yet. That's a long road, and you will need to earn back our trust." He'd hang up and leave her alone in silence yet again. Almost I could hear the phone hit the floor, her body giving into despair. She'd lie there, curled up on the cold floor, the reality closing in that it was all going to end. The apartment would be empty and she'd be there, staying there for hours, refusing to move, until the first light of morning crept through the window and the shadows stretched across the walls. By the new day she would also realize how truly alone she was. The game was over already. She just didn't know it yet.